The Pittsburgh Steelers are reportedly sending George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys in a blockbuster trade here ahead of the 2025 season. The Steelers once now had an opportunity to have a dynamic, lethal wide receiver room. Now, all of a sudden, the Steelers are going to figure out how to part ways here with George Pickens, a guy that lacked effort at times, but yet showed high athleticism and was reported to be in love with Mike Tomlin and wanting to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. I always tell you here on the channel, where there's smoke, there's fire. But in this case, I really didn't think that the Pittsburgh Steelers would be interested in trading George Pickens, considering the opportunity that was in front of them to have one of the league's best wide receiver rooms, one of the most lethal and dangerous combinations in DK Metcalf and George Pickens. The Steelers could have paid George Pickens easily. But, however, we're not inside of that building, so we don't know. Maybe the Steelers weren't comfortable in giving George Pickens a bag. Maybe they're going to go out there and try to figure out how to add elsewhere to this wide receiver room. They just recently made the addition of Robert Woods. They have a rookie in Roman Wilson that was troubled by injuries and, frankly, I think troubled by some other things, considering his inability to get on the field and understand the offensive schematics. I think that was a major problem. They have the emergence of young Calvin Austin III. This, my friends, does not seem to be the correct move at this time, considering I believe you could have waited until the trade deadline to make something happen for George Pickens, and you may have increased his value if he was highly productive. And again, we are not inside of that building, so the Steelers may have had intimate knowledge that George Pickens was going to hold out or something of that matter, or something of that sort, to maybe force the hand of the Steelers into paying him a substantial amount of money here in 2025 and give him that extension. You would have probably had to pay, in my estimate, between $27 and $33 million per season. That would have been the range in which you would have had to sign George Pickens. Now, the Dallas Cowboys find themselves in a situation where they could have one of the league's most lethal and deadly combinations at the wide receiver position. Also, the Steelers now find themselves still without a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. Does this mean all of a sudden that Aaron Rodgers may not want to come to the Pittsburgh Steelers, considering they traded off a major key piece to this offense? Maybe that's something now that tells you the Steelers are going to have to roll with Will Howard and Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson as their quarterback room. This could really open a lot of doors here into what the Steelers' plans may be. Initially here, future draft picks will be moved. It appears that the trade will include a third rounder and a later round pick swap between the teams. I told you that earlier when you were talking about a trade. Everybody was in the chat talking about a trade with George Pickens. I told you they would be hard pressed to get any more than a third, and it seems to be the case. A third round pick, and I'm not saying that because of the talent of George Pickens not being good enough to get anything better, but again, it's more potential than it is reality. George Pickens hasn't been able to put up the monster, massive number one wide receiver numbers that the Steelers have wanted. Now, you can take into account the Steelers have lacked offensively in the offensive coordinator department at times, the head coach at times being ultra conservative. So you could blame some of those things, the quarterback position not being great. You could blame that. So those could be all factors that contribute to the George Pickens lack of production. But you've seen flashes. You've seen times when George Pickens has went totally off and made big things happen inside of a football game. You go back to that Cincinnati Bengals game where him and Mason Rudolph were able to dismantle the Bengals and absolutely blow them out on a Christmas Eve game, I believe. So you've seen George Pickens make those flashy plays. You've seen him have a big game. You've seen the potential, but you haven't seen the consistency there. You haven't seen all the things that you would want to see, again, out of a number one wide receiver target. However, I believe that this trade to be one in which was a bad move by Omar Khan in this organization. I believe it to be a trade that makes zero sense because it puts the Steelers back in the same position that they were in 2024, 2023, 2022. It puts them back in that situation where you didn't need to be in that situation. Again, you had the available money to pay him if need be. You had an opportunity to wait until the trade deadline to perhaps increase his value, and you simply could have franchise tagged him if you really, really wanted to. So again, you could have controlled George Pickens for years and still had outs up until the trade deadline here in the 2025 season. So it doesn't really, frankly, make much sense to me here, especially for the return. If it would have been a handsome return, a second-round pick, a high second-round pick of some sort, then it starts to make a little bit of sense for me, even though I don't think any trade right now, again, makes any sense at all. I know there's the other side of the coin where you could have had the value of George Pickens go down. He could have sat out. An injury could have got him. I understand all of those things, but I think the reward for waiting would have been a little bit more handsome in my eyes, and the chances for a bigger reward would have been there in my eyes. But again, the Steelers make this move, now sending George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys in a stunning move, frankly, but again, not so stunning because we knew where there was smoke, there was fire. So the Steelers have been reportedly fielding many offers, many calls on George Pickens, and this leading up and before the NFL draft. Many thought a blockbuster trade would have been made on draft night so the Steelers could have gotten draft capital inside of the 2025 draft. However, this does set them up for the 2026 draft to go out there and really make some moves. This now gives them, 14 picks, I believe, something like that. They have several. But this adds, again, to the draft capital that you would be able to utilize in order to package together to go up and get a big-name quarterback if you so desire. But teams aren't going to be so willing. If the quarterback class is very rich, and the quarterback class has a lot of real guys that are kind of guys that you think are slam dunks, teams aren't going to be inclined to get rid of those picks regardless of the price tag. They're going to want to hold on to them because franchise quarterbacks don't come around very often. But that's neither here nor there. That's for a conversation later tonight on Steel City Live here on Mike Drop Sports, our daily live show. Make sure you check that out. But dealing with this George Pickens trade right now, where do the Steelers go? Where do they turn? Does Calvin Austin now all of a sudden step into that number 2 wide receiver role? What about Robert Woods? How is Roman Wilson going to respond here in year 2? Well, really year 1, because he didn't get to have a year 1 in reality. His rookie season was just riddled with injury and lack of knowledge. So where do you turn? How do you make this wide receiver room back to that elite status? I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if there is any way you can get that done, unless you go out there and you make another trade for somebody else. But then again, that may have not really made sense considering you're just trading off a piece now. I know the contract situation. So again, there's a lot of variables in this, guys, and we are going to have to sit down and really iron them out and break them down. We'll do a couple lives today with this big news looming now as the Steelers are about to get moving here on these offseason programs and really start to get this team together and start to head toward the train station, to get on board, to head toward hopefully what is a successful 2025 season. But this, in my eyes, does not bring you to that successful 2025 season in my eyes. I think this is a detrimental move. A guy that just joined the team in 2022 here in the NFL draft. They spent a second-round pick on George Pickens. He is a guy that's so capable of going over 1,000. He is a guy that's capable of getting double-digit touchdowns. But George Pickens' with his attitude has tremendously lessened his value with the Steelers. And that just goes to show you some teams don't want to put up with it. And the Steelers are in, quite frankly, an internal rebuild mode without ripping it all down. They are rebuilding this roster, and maybe George Pickens does not fit. And that's okay. But if you are able to recognize that he doesn't fit, you better be damn sure, because you're trading away a talent that is ultra, ultra good. And again, I know the trouble. He's not a guy that gets off the field trouble or anything like that. We're not saying it. But he is a guy that acts out at times, a guy that takes plays off, a guy that seems to not go as hard as he could. He cost the Steelers some stuff last year in terms of production. He cost them a touchdown, I know of, against Kansas City. We could go on and on and on. But George Pickens, now going to the Dallas Cowboys, according to many reports out there, and this is going to be talked about for the rest of the offseason, and this is going to be a major turning point. And if the Pittsburgh Steelers fall off the rails in 2025, many are going to revert back to this trade as one of the worst in Steelers franchise history. All right, guys, thank you for joining us. Don't forget, again, to join us tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the show Steel City Live. We are going to get into this George Pickens trade in a big, big, big way. If you want truthful, solid content, this is your home. So make sure you like, share, subscribe to the channel, and we will be back talking all this craziness that is going on right now around the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this has been, to say the least, a very, very interesting offseason. So until next time, my friends, I'm Jason. This is Mike Drop Sports. Peace.